Major General Mall, United States Air Force, First Commander of the 23rd Air Force Combat Rescue and Special Operations. Pilot, SAC, TAC, MAC, Special Arts, Ops and Search and Rescue. And today's presentation is my 5-year war. General Mall, it's all yours to share.
Okay. How's that looking?
That looks fine, General. You're up and ready.
Okay. The normal tour of duty in Vietnam is, for most everyone, was a 1-year tour, and that's what mine was. But I flew my first mission into Vietnam in 1967. And I just graduated. I was about a third of the way through my career. I graduated from the Air Command and Staff College, and about 20% of the class went to Vietnam, and the rest of us went to the other Air Force operations, mostly stateside. And my assignment was to C-141s, brand new aircraft, which was in production in 1967. And it was a Lockheed Starlifter. We called it the Lockheed Lizard. That was an affectionate term because the crews really loved that airplane. Had a 5-man crew, the aircraft commander, who was the pilot, the co-pilot, and the navigator, and a flight engineer up on the flight deck. And in the back end, we had the loadmaster. So beautiful airplane, lots of power, 35 tons, could carry anything, anywhere. Big clamshell doors in the back. We had the all-weather landing system, about 10 years before the airlines did. And this was the route I flew to Vietnam. I did this 2.5 times a month. I was stationed at Dover Air Force Base, Delaware. There were 300 141s produced, 150 on each coast, 3 bases on each coast. As I say, I got Dover, Delaware. And Dover, Delaware had the largest, still does have the largest aerial port in the world. And that's where all the supplies and goodies for Vietnam originated. And the way they worked this, they pre-positioned 20 crews at Elmendorf Air Force Base, Alaska, and Yokota Air Force Base, Japan. 20 full air crews. So when I would take off from Dover, Delaware, I would fly the 6.5-hour flight up to Elmendorf, call in 2 hours out, alert the other crew, one of those 20 crews sitting on the ground. That crew would take the airplane all the way to Japan, and the situation would repeat itself. That crew would turn it over to another crew who would fly the airplane into Vietnam and back out again, then turn it over to another crew who would be flying it back stateside. So 13 time zones, 8,700 miles. I did that 2.5 times a month while I was waiting for my Vietnam assignment. What did I carry in the C-141? Let's see. Jungle boots, people, Seabees, Marines, Army, part of Bob Hope's show. One time I had 50 sentry dogs. That was a load. And Marine gun barrels. I must have carried 4 or 5 trips with these. I don't know what they were, 105 millimeter. They took up the whole airframe. The Marines burned out those gun barrels all the time, and they were so happy to see us. We'd land at the Marine base and they'd unload these large gun barrels. One time, cardboard pizza cartons, anything you needed to run a war. Ammunition, batteries, so forth. So you'd fly up here to Elmendorf, you go into crew rest, another crew would take the airplane. So the airplanes kept moving. And you get 20 degrees below zero maybe here, in fact down here would be 100 degrees. The crew was out about 5 or 6 days. I'd fly out here and back in 5 days, and sometimes 6 days. You'd get 2 or 3 days off when you landed, when you're back home. And then you were off to do it again. So all this time I'm waiting for my assignment. What am I going to get? When I fly to Vietnam. Here's the inside of the C-141. You're about halfway down the crew compartment now. You're looking forward toward the crew compartment. This is the cargo compartment. You're looking at the front of the airplane. The ever-present troop carrier seats, these fold down. Many of you have probably ridden in these. Carry about 100, 150 troops that way. These shiny things on the floor are rollers. You had a little thumb screw, you put your thumb in and flip it over and you could make a solid floor. But these rollers were to facilitate moving these pallets of cargo, about 8 feet square, whatever the cargo happened to be, ammunition, supplies and so forth. And the crew compartment you can't see because it's up here behind a closed door. This is an entryway on the left there. And here's with the floorboards flipped over now. You got a solid floor. There's a demonstration of litters for litter patients. Again, you have the troop seats on the side. Here are 3 airline seats. You could also configure for 121 troops airline seats, just regular airline seats in the whole cargo compartment. There you see the steps going up into the front of the airplane. That was an easy airplane to fly, a very safe airplane, very reliable. It was rushed into production, and the actual performance, long-range performance volumes were written by the crews as they flew the airplane to Vietnam. So part of the performance data was done while they were in service. When you got to Vietnam, there were 3 things that you would carry out on. You either go out empty, or you carry the wounded, or you carry the flag caskets of the killed in action, and you could always tell how the war was going. Here's one of the medevac buses. We had ambulatory patients. That meant they were walking, the walking wounded, or we had litter patients, a combination of those. And here you see the inside of the airplane again, now configured for the litter combination. Back here, the flight nurse took over and ran that back into that airplane. She told you what altitudes you could fly at, what kind of cabin altitude to maintain. And when you were a medevac and you had that medevac call sign, instead of MAC 123, you're now medevac 123. You had priority over every aircraft in the U.S. except Air Force One. If you had turbulent air, you just started to climb. You didn't ask permission. You told them where you were going, and they cleared everything out of your way. You could do an en route descent from 200 miles out. They would clear all civilian traffic for you, so they were very good about that. And my first mission into Vietnam in the C-141 was a memorable one. Normally they line you up stateside 20 miles out and they give you a radar approach or an ILS approach. And when I'm going into Vietnam the first time, I was told by the radar controller, okay, take over visually, you're on your own. And I looked out the window, all I could see was jungle. I asked the navigator, where the hell's the airport? And all kinds of airplanes flying around, helicopters, Jim Grimm flying across my path. And a co-pilot finally spotted a bend in the river. He said, it's got to be at that bend in the river. So we got lined up about 3 miles out. And he said, look off your right wingtip. And here's a guy in an A-1 Skyraider flying on my wingtip, dropping ordnance while I'm on final approach. So we landed, and while they were offloading the cargo, the base come under mortar attack, some kind, or rockets. And I ended up in a ditch, hoping they wouldn't get the airplane, and they didn't. We got out of there. 2 days later, I'm walking around with a wife and kids in a shopping mall in Dover, Delaware. So it was a bizarre operation. Everybody all right? Okay. Contrast that 8,700 mile an hour logistics with the 300 miles that the enemy had, most of it in protected sanctuaries. Okay. I keep hearing thundering noises. Anyway, most of this was protected by sanctuaries, and we had a strange bunch of rules we gave up here at Haiphong Harbor.
Somebody's got their mic on.
Somebody's got a mic on. It's wanting me out.
Yeah, could everybody please check their mic and mute your mic, please?
Okay. Sounds quieter. Anyway, right up here was Haiphong Harbor, and the Russian, Chinese, North Korean ships would all line up to offload it. But North Vietnam was a rice paddy economy. They weren't building any kind of goods. Most of the stuff was coming off of ships at Haiphong Harbor, and they were off limits. Our crews could not strike them. That's crews that were going north. And also they couldn't, in the early stages, they could make lined up on the runways on the ground. That was rules of engagement. You had to wait till they were up engaged. There were essentially two air wars in Vietnam. In the north, the supersonic, the first line fighters. In the south, the older generation, bombing and strafing.
I know my brother.
Yeah, Gorla, can you mute your mic, please?
Okay. The air war to the north was supersonic, first line fighters. The air in the south was the older generation, bombing and strafing. And as the war dragged on, my chances of getting a fighter assignment were improving all the time. I trained as a fighter pilot, even though I ended up in Strategic Air Command flying the big bombers and the airlift. A lot of my classmates were starting to get assignments either up north or in the south. About 20% of them would get the one up north or one down. So I was highly hopeful to get something supersonic, get back into the fighter business. Up north, they flew the first line fighters, the F-4, twin engine, big heavy airplane, initially equipped with air-to-air missiles, and they weren't very successful against the more nimble MiG fighters. Pilots were using these air-to-air missiles that were really unreliable. They lobbied their way into a gun that they put on the airplane as an afterthought and just barely skied right under the nose here. They had a little more success. The F-105s were the ones that did the strikes up north. Had a great talk from our Gary Barnhill, and if anything, he underestimated the threat that was aimed at these. They flew against the most concentrated anti-aircraft in history, with aid and abetting of the State Department, tipping them off to where they were going to come. He mentioned that in his brief, but I think if anything, he understated the threat. These guys were real heroes. And the F-4 was supposed to protect them. And they had a tough time doing that against the threats. And this is what the threat was. Surface-to-air missiles. These are mobile SAMs. Here's the MiG-21, a much smaller, lighter aircraft, a much smaller signature in the sky. The F-4 had a big black plume of smoke coming out the back of it. It was easy to spot and a lot less maneuverable than this little thing.
I can't get the speaker. Can't get nothing.
Hey,
Can't hear anything at all.
you gotta shut up, Mike.
Yeah. It's everything's the way I used to do it.
This is the Zoom. You click on that one.
Yeah, I've done that a couple times.
Click here. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a link.
Yeah.
Can you help,
It's the same
can
one.
you help Tom go to mute if you highlight it?
Go to mute.
And then allow.
Yeah, I've done that
Okay.
before. And
Can you,
basically,
can you help Tom go to mute?
You're not really.
At the,
Okay.
if you highlight the screen, you'll see
I just
the
can't get it.
microphone.
The
Can you
speaker's
mute?
not working. I don't know what that means.
Yeah, I'm looking
to
for
correct it.
Your connection. Your feedback.
Says I'm muted, but
Yeah.
There. Okay,
All right.
3 threats up north. The SAMs, the MiGs, and the conventional anti-aircraft. And here you see our beloved Jane Fonda operating the elevation, giving a little morale boost to the boys down at the 5th
that's
Aircraft
Yeah.
Battalion.
Click on him. So what is this?
escape or double click.
Oh, that's to escape for the big screen.
Tom, can you mute? You come in through.
I don't
Oh, I'm
think
just gonna hang in
you
here.
hear us, Scott.
Maybe I got lucky.
Can you mute him?
What I'm looking for.
32 people are on.
Oh, working now.
Those people.
Now, Scotty, you can just mute everybody and then let Bill come back on, and that'll take care of Tom.
I gotta go.
It's at the bottom of your participants screen. There should be a mute all
32.
down at the bottom of that participant screen when you click on it.
32, was it?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, I'm not seeing it.
So what can we do then? Click on the connection.
oh. no.
Look at the speaker.
Scotty, can you make me a co-host and I'll get it?
There he goes. He's muted now.
Okay, very good.
Right.
And Dwight, can you mute yourself also, please?
I
So
will.
which have you downloaded that?
No, see, it's
Oh.
up.
There's
Okay.
Okay.
Where was I? Okay.
Jane Fonda.
So after 4 years is up, I finally get, my number comes up. Which one of these jets am I going to get? Am I going to get the supersonic up north?
that does.
Or am I going to get the aircraft down south?
Shift
I call it
3 today.
There he goes. Little drum roll.
No,
Like the Cessna Skymaster, a civilian airplane, 120 mile an hour on a good day, twin engine, took the seats out of the back, put a radio in it, and there's my airplane, an Oscar Deuce 02 Ford air controller airplane. The purpose of the Ford air controller was to sort out
Speaker view.
You can record it.
the purpose of the the fast-moving fighters. They're going so fast and they're burning so much fuel.
You're fine. Don't do anything.
They can't see in the jungle. All they can see is a blur of green, and they're burning fuel very fast. So what you have is the Ford air controller who goes around on a little route like a paper route. He has white phosphorus rockets under each wing to mark targets as a reference point so that these fast-moving fighters who don't have any loiter time and are going so fast they can't see things can see the target and make their strike and return home. So when I find troops in contact or I had a down pilot or some situation, I would call a command post at Saigon and they would send up a flight of 4 aircraft usually. You could ask for certain types of weapons, slick bombs, napalm, so forth. You'd get what they had available. The threat to me down south, a lot less than what was up north, of course, the AK-47, a real assault rifle because it meets the Pentagon definition of an assault rifle. It is fully automatic, 20 round, 30 round, 50 round, and 100 round drum magazine. Say if you flew above 2,500 feet, this was ineffective against you, but as a fact, you couldn't operate above 1,500 feet because you couldn't see what you were looking for. So it was always a threat to us, to the facts. Here's what we had to deal with. The fighters we had were the A-37, the F-4, the F-100, and the B-57. I'll show you a picture of those later. We had NAPES, which is napalm, slick bombs, high drag bombs. A high drag bomb, picture of it here, was devised to slow the bomb as it was released. This thing would blossom out and slow the bomb down like a little parachute because the fighter bombers were going in so low, sometimes they would be affected by their own ordnance and be damaged by their own thing. So if they had high drags, it would slow the weapon down and give them time to escape. And the 20 Mike was, of course, was 20 millimeter cannons. So here we go. Here's the A-37. Originally a primary pilot training airplane in the U.S. Air Force called the Tweety Bird. They put super engines in it, souped up engines, hung bombs under it, put a gun in the front, 2 seats side by side, and they called it the Super Tweet, the A-37. On my days off, I had a buddy that flew these. I got to fly with him. I flew 2 missions in this airplane, got to shoot back for a change. And these guys were low and slow, and they were very good at hitting the target. So if I ordered up a flight and I got Super Tweets, I knew I had a good, accurate, they were slow enough that they could hit the target. And I was always happy to see these guys. What would happen is they would come in at 20,000 feet and check in with me, and I would write on the canopy in grease pencil what kind of armament they had on them and their call signs, and then I would go in and mark the target and direct them in one at a time, and they would strike the target that way. We had the F-4s in the south also, that same plane that was up north in the fighter bomber role. Here you see them dropping slick bombs. But they weren't very good at what they were doing. I don't want to offend any F-4 pilots, but these guys couldn't hit anything. I don't know whether it was the airplane wasn't designed for that. Here you see the gun under the nose. But if I got F-4s and I had troops in contact, I had a real worrisome time of it because you never knew where they were going to go. They would come blasting in and spread those bombs all over. I always liked to get the Hun, the F-100. He had the 20 millimeter cannons. Here you can see him on the front. He had 4. Each airplane had 4, and they were very good if you had a down pilot or if you had troops in contact. They were very accurate. And the best of all was the B-57 Canberra, which was a British airplane. We call it the Cranberry. It was built under license in the U.S., and it had a bomb bay. And look at all the armament that thing could carry, rockets, bombs, and so forth. And they could loiter over the target for quite a while, and they were slow enough that they could hit the target. So I was always happy to see these guys. Here you see I'm marking a target. You see the smoke now with, I shot the Willie Pete. I have the fighters on hold up above. And now they have a reference point, something they can see. So I would direct them one at a time. If the enemy was where my smoke was, I would say, hit my smoke. Or in this case, the enemy was down here and I didn't want them to know that we knew where they were. I would say, my smoke, 170 degrees and 200 yards. And they would go for this opening right here. So the smoke was a reference point. Here I mark it along a tree line. The bad guys are in the trees. The good guys are caught out in the open. So shoot the smoke right on the line where the bad guys were. And you don't want to direct the fighters in this direction, west to east, because they sometimes drop long. They would hit the friendlies. You want to direct them behind the smoke from northeast to southwest. Run along this line. As you got more and more accomplished at what you were doing, you had a better control of the fighters. Here's a Hun, an F-100 going in with a slick bomb. And napalm was a psychological weapon primarily. It was good in the open. It wasn't any good in the jungle. As you can imagine, it got muffled pretty good. And it wasn't that effective, but if you caught troops in the open, it was a pretty good weapon to have. After I got a little accomplished in the O2, they introduced a new airplane, the OV-10 Bronco, the first plane designed as a FAC airplane. Now we're up to 250 mile an hour. I got a front seat and a back seat, an observer, and it had a minigun on it. It also had the white phosphorus rocket. So it had the same mission, and now we're going a little faster, a little more effective. And it had a big greenhouse canopy here. You could lean over the side and look straight down because the canopy overshot the fuselage here. You could look straight down beneath you. And if you ever go out to Chino Airport, you can see CAL FIRE uses these airplanes for the same thing. There are some OV-10s left over, and they use it to direct the airdrops on fires. Here I am after my first mission in the OV-10, and you can see the two seats side by side here. Actually, I got 2 missions in the OV-10, and then they yanked me out and put me in the back end of a command and control airplane stationed in Thailand. I finished up my tour flying in the back end of a command and control airplane. They opened up the air war over Cambodia, and I flew about 3 or 4 months in the back end of a airplane, not being a pilot as such, but just riding along and directing airstrikes over Cambodia. So that was my Vietnam tour. 5 years I counted, but they only gave me credit for 1. I always leave the young ones something to think about, and it's something that they can hash around. And they always ask me, what do you do when you get out of the service? So I worked for a Fortune 50 corporation for about 3 years, and then I got a little frustrated and started my own company, and I managed international air terminals. I managed Terminal 2 at LAX for about 9 years when the airline still owned it. It's now reverted back to the city. And then after I retired the 3rd time, I started missing flying, so I built this little thing in my garage, all metal, 200 mile an hour, learned how to rivet. It took me 3 years. I never built anything in my life, but it turned out pretty good. I flew it to the East Coast. I flew it up to Canada, and big thing to take away from that, it was 50 mile an hour faster than the airplane they sent me to war in. Any questions?
That was great, General. Especially
Bill.
the part about you building your own airplane.
Yeah, the kids get a kick out of that. They couldn't believe it. I couldn't either. It was,
Bill, David Fay, how about some of your experiences in the 121?
C-121?
When you were flying the AB-CCC?
Yeah, it was pretty routine. We had a Thai, a Vietnamese, and a Cambodian on board. And they were supposed to coordinate airstrikes, and it was a public relations thing on the ground that these people were all working together, actually hated each other. And we actually separate them physically and keep them apart. But what we could do is set up an orbit over Phnom Penh and relay to that same blue chip command post the fact, because they didn't have the radios, wouldn't reach that far into Cambodia. So we were mainly a big relay station, had a big plotting board where we could plot where the strikes were going and so forth. It was pretty much a big airborne fact was what it was. That's very boring too.
I missed when you started, or how long did you do the flights? How long did you fly from Dover and over and back? How was that 3 years or 4 years?
The crew would be out for 5 days. I did that for 4 years. The crew would be out for 5 or 6 days. You'd get 2 or 3 days off.
Wow, and that's just so, that must have been so surreal, like you shared, that first mission, and then you're back with your kids. But you did that for another 4 years.
Yeah, it was, and you'd take off at 2 in the morning and land at 2 in the afternoon. It was just like a 24/7 thing. And in Alaska and in Japan, the Officers Club, the NCO Club, everything worked 24/7. You could order ham and eggs at 2 in the afternoon or 2 in the morning. So they did everything they could for the air crews, but it was pretty strenuous. You know, the hours, you were just dead tired when you got back. It took about 24 hours to get reoriented and go back in the system again. And you might leave Dover at 2 in the morning. And as you flew, you could see the guys coming back the other way. They flew above us, and it was just like it was an air bridge going all the way over there. And they actually wore out the 141s. There aren't any left. They were brought in brand new, and they burned them up in the Vietnam War, just wore them out.
Did they have doctors, like when you guys flew back with did you have?
Yeah, we had flight surgeons and nurses. Mainly it was a head nurse, and those gals were great. And of course, we were saving a lot of lives. They told us from the Korean War, and of course from World War II, they never had anything like that. You could be wounded on the battlefield, and because the airplanes kept moving with that staging system, you could have a guy in a hospital in the U.S. 48 hours after he was wounded. So it was a great system. And of course, some guys died on the way back too. We had several times you'd lose some of them because they're critically ill. They try to get out as quick as they could.
Hey, Bill, you said from Dover to Elmendorf it was 6.5 hours, something like that?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, but you didn't lay over there, did you?
Yeah.
You would lay over there?
Yeah, I flew that. You'd fly that first leg, lay over there, and another crew would take the airplane as soon as it was refueled and fly it to Japan, and then be met by another crew. That crew would fly it in and back out again. We never stayed in Vietnam.
Okay.
So we stayed then at, you would get 12 hours crew rest at every one of those stops. So we'd fly up to Elmendorf, get 12 hours crew rest, and 12 hours on the money, the phone would be ringing, you're being alerted for the inbound. You get briefed on what load you had, hazardous cargo and so forth. You'd fly it down to Japan, turn it over to another crew. They'd take it in and back out again, and then you'd go back home again.
Oh, okay.
But you laid over at each one of those points, Elmendorf and Yokota.
General, this is Jim Brown. Oh, go ahead. Kirby, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Yeah, this is a quick one. You said you were flying caskets back. Were they always in caskets, or did you also have box bags?
They were always in flat grade caskets. At one time, I had 50 Marines on one airplane. That was the most I ever had. And of course, you'd never mix the wounded and the killed in action. You were always separate, or else you were empty. I never remember bringing much back home from there. But if you came out empty and you got to Yokota Air Base, Japan, you'd most probably get 50 Honda motorcycles on board, because that was a big thing to bring home. They always brought them home for somebody else. I never got one, but you could see the whole cargo compartment lined up with Honda motorcycles. And then the brass got a hold of that, and they said, no more wheeled vehicles. So Mr. Honda gave it to us in 3 boxes, you know.
General, is that an RV 5 or 6 or whatever there you got on the
RV6A. RV6A, yeah.
Have you been up to Oshkosh a few times?
Yes, I have. I got parked in the number 1 slot one time by old Ben, whatever his name is himself.
Beautiful job, sir.
Thank you. He liked my paint job.
Hey, Bill, can you tell us a little bit, Sal Harper, can you tell us a little bit about your activities during the Cuban Missile Crisis?
Yeah, I have a whole thing on that. I was in Strategic Air Command flying that airplane behind me, the B-47.
Right.
That's a B-47.
Yeah.
You know that.
Yeah, okay, yes.
When the crisis initially started, we were dispersed. It was all on SAC plan, not to be caught on the ground all at once. We were dispersed to civilian airports. And I was sent to Detroit Wayne International Airport. And I parked at the end of the runway. And I had 4 thermonuclear weapons on board, each one designated for a special target in Russia, which I'd flown many times in practice and in a simulator and so forth. We had all that pretty much memorized as a SAC crew. And we sat at the end of the runway, and when the JFK set up a blockade around Cuba, and the Russians were still sending ships toward Cuba, and we knew if they ran that blockade or fired on our ships, we were ready to go. And so I'll never forget the airlines airplane taxiing by, and here we are sitting at the end of the runway, and all these people looking over at this bomber sitting at the end of the runway, and JFK had been on the radio or the TV the night before saying how close we came to war. We were ready to go. But they blinked, so here we are.
General, did you say that you flew the C-121, the Bookie Bird?
121, yeah, I flew in the back end of it. I did not fly the airplane. My piloting days ended in that fact plane, that OV-10 Bronco. I was assigned to the Airborne Command and Control in the back end of that College Eye, they call them. It was a big constellation is what it was.
We were out of Phan Rang and Da Nang in the C-121.
Oh yeah, I was at Korat.
And we did bring back kids in body bags, not just coffin.
Was that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know that. No, all ours were the flag grade coffins. And Dover has the mortuary, so.
Yeah, this is Steve Tucker. Could you loop or Kubanate that B-47?
Yes, I did. I have pictures of that. What we did, that was to escape the weapon. We had, in the early stages, the early weapons, there was a problem with escaping the blast. So what we would do is indicate 450 knots at 500 feet above the ground and pull it straight up into a half loop, releasing the weapon on the way up, and then do a Cubanate, roll out back down to 500 feet above the ground. I have one of my presentations has that maneuver and shows the weapon release and everything. So the weapon will go one way and the airplane will go the other way.
Yeah.
We lost a lot of airplanes doing that training, I'll tell you.
Why? What happened?
First of all, flying low level at night, this was before GPS and so forth. You're doing 600 miles an hour at night. You miss a turn or you're a few seconds off with it. There's mountainous terrain, there's all kind of obstacles. We lost a lot just flying low level.
Wow.
But I think we lost, I have the IG in my presentation, the IG figures. I think we lost over 10% of the fleet in training.
Wow. Wow.
Generally, your comment about war doesn't solve problems except for Nazism, communism, fascism, terrorism. It certainly could apply to the Vietnam War. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I thought we were over there to contain communism, and I just thought the rules of engagement that I saw, everything they taught us in the Air War College and the Air Command and Staff, we were doing the opposite of. We were offering them sanctuaries everywhere. We had so many constraints on air power. I thought we should have won that war early and quickly, but only won World War II in 4 years, for God's sake. But air power was so restrained, and it was unbelievable.
Have you been back to Vietnam for any reason?
Never.
I've been back 6 times.
Is that right?
Yeah.
I just had no interest in ever going back there. I don't know.
I didn't either, but I go back to help kids now.
That's a good reason to go back.
and the people there don't even know there was a war, because you have to be 50 years old to even know there's a war.
Yeah, that's right. Isn't that the truth?
General, this is Joe Finelli. I'm on the East Coast, just outside of Baltimore. My friend Tom Gorla invited me to the session, and I'm curious if I was on one of your C-141 flights. I was home on a leave from Korea in October of '67, and I took a MAC flight from Dover back to Korea. We had 4 passengers. There was a general and his wife. She was a lieutenant, I believe. I'm not sure what her grade was. And I was enlisted. I was drafted into the Army. And the plane was full of batteries. I think there were Union Carbide batteries. And I don't know when you started flying those flights, but we stopped in the Philippines and dropped off one of the other enlisted men. And I think we went, I'm not sure, I don't remember exactly where we stopped first, whether we went to Japan and then the Philippines or vice versa. And then to South Korea. I thought the batteries were going to Vietnam.
I've taken batteries to Vietnam. That was a common load. I don't know what they were for, but this cargo flight, because I'm surprised they had a lot of passengers on there, because some of the stuff we carried, we couldn't take any people with.
We were just 4 passengers, and I don't know why I didn't know the rules. So I was just happy to get a flight.
Yeah.
This is Don Pogler. I didn't quite catch all the timeline. I have a childhood friend who was an OV-10A pilot who's still MIA, who was shot down by a SAM in April of '72.
April of '72, yeah, I left in '71.
Okay.
It got a lot of guys in trouble because it had a minigun on it, and a lot of times they try to engage where they shouldn't. The O2, the one I flew first, didn't have any armament at all. But some guys got in trouble trying to duel some anti-aircraft site or something. Most of the threat in the south was, like I say, the AK-47, but occasionally there was something bigger down there, but I managed to avoid those.
Well, Bruce was flying a spotting mission, so he had a Marine with him flying in the Bronco.
Yeah. I purposely omitted up north. Of course, the Marines and the Navy were engaged up there also. I just didn't know enough about their operation, but I neglected to say that. There was, against that threat, that was the biggest threat anybody ever flew against. There were Marines and Navy pilots engaged up there also.
General, is that OV-10 fairly airworthy if you lose an engine?
If you what?
If you lose an engine?
Yeah, it would fly on one engine very good. Now, the O2 would not. The O2, if you lost the rear engine, you were going to go down eventually. If you lost the front engine, you could get back to your base because the rear engine was the most effective. I don't understand all that, but the aerodynamics of the pusher was a lot. They were the same type of engine, but if you lost the rear engine, you were going down.
Are you still flying this little RV?
No, some guy wanted it more than I did.
Okay.
Sold it.
General, you could stop your share if you want. That way everybody be able to see you in a bigger screen.
Okay.
General, just an outside comment from a captain in Vietnam. When I was in, a general officer was one step below God. And I just want to thank you for your service, sir.
I enjoy that. I enjoyed every minute of it. Not every minute of it, but most of it. And I appreciate that comment. And when people tell me that, I feel a little guilty because I feel like I won the lotto or something. I had the distinct honor and privilege of flying and fighting for the Air Force for 32 years. I thought that was pretty great. But I appreciate that. Thank you.
My dad was a pilot in World War II, and he flew B-17.
Oh, yeah.
Many people might not know it, but General Mall, why don't you tell them about Grenada real quickly, about the fact that you flew in. I think you're probably one of the last generals in combat in the U.S. recently.
Yeah, the invasion of Grenada, I was the Air Force component commander. Since I commanded all the special forces, and we invaded the island of Grenada, 1983, and I was on the first C-130, and we rescued 320 American medical students down there and kicked out the Bulgarians, the Chinese, the North Koreans, all the usual suspects, sent them home, and it's today a democracy or a parliamentary democracy, and the medical school's back in action. So that was a quickie.
But you flew in there as what? Were you a brigadier or were you a major general when you flew in there?
General, I was 2-star.
Yeah, 2-star general flying in combat.
That was my last combat mission.
Bill, would you care to comment? I heard a rumor that the North Vietnamese were alerted for our airstrikes by Washington, D.C.
Yeah, they were. The State Department was notifying the North Vietnamese in order to minimize civilian casualties. They were tipping them off on where the strikes were going to come. So rather than move the civilians, they moved in the anti-aircraft. And that's why those guys had such tremendous concentration of aircraft. And the same clowns betrayed us at Grenada, too, because we went down there all away radio silence, and we found out that the State Department had alerted the Soviets to stay away from the airfield at 5:30 in the morning. Well, that, of course, tipped the whole thing off, and we could have easily lost a C-130 loaded with 56 paratroopers. So I have a great part in my heart for those guys.
Do we have any reason why they did that, sir?
Yeah, they didn't want the Soviets. They didn't want an international incident. They didn't want the Soviets to be down there. We knew there were Russians and North Koreans, the usual gang down there trying to overthrow that government and set up another Cuba. And of course, Ronald Reagan was the president, and he was a student of history. He didn't want another Cuban Missile Crisis, so he decided to clean that place out. What was originally an extraction of just the students with our Special Operations Forces turned out to be a full-scale invasion with C-130s, 141s, and everything else flying in there too. Eventually, the whole 82nd Airborne went in. But in 60 days, it was over, and as I say, it's back to normal again. Ever since.
You know, you got very unique. So the fact that you did that for 4 years, too bad you couldn't have got frequent flyer miles for that. But the fact that you were in combat and then back home, flying into a combat zone and back home for 4 straight years, that had to be surreal. And then it's funny, the fact that you were at a football game. Weren't you at a football game when somebody came and tapped you on the shoulder to go?
Yeah, I was on leave, on vacation. And we were watching a football game at the Citadel, which my son was at college down there, right next to Charleston Air Force Base. And by gosh, they came and got me, and he said, you got a message over at the headquarters. And next thing I know, I was flying and people were shooting at me.
Hey, I think you might want to know that picture of Jane Fonda.
Yeah.
That of course, that's a memory all of us Vietnam veterans remember. But she, in the newspaper this morning, she has now been given a Lifetime Achievement Award by the Golden Globes.
Yeah, I saw it for an award. I was going to mention that. I saw that in the register, too. So she got arrested 3 times this year, too, last year.
Yeah.
So
she's still up to her old tricks, her activism.
Yeah, we love her.
Yeah.
Bill, did you ever fly a mission for the B-52s?
Never. I avoided the B-52 like a plague. I want a note for it. If you flew the B-47, it spoiled you.
We're going to be available. This is Al Harvard again. Are you going to be available next week for a presentation? No, reason I asked is because I'm presenting next week, and your aircraft will surface on this one. It's I was a young enlisted guy at the time, but it's quite interesting, the presentation I give on it. It's at the end of my story.
Okay, well, I look forward to seeing your story.
Yeah. I'll tell you what I hated about the B-52 and the 36.
General, did you ever hit March Air Force Base?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, 141s were stationed on both coasts. There were 150 on each coast, and they had them at Travis, Cord, and Norton Air Force Base, which is in San Bernardino, now closed. But that were the 3 bases on the West Coast. The 3 bases on the East Coast were McGuire, Dover, and Charleston, and we were supposed to originally supply NATO. The East Coast would supply NATO, the West Coast would take care of that, but Vietnam turned it upside down.
You never went to Eglin?
Pardon me?
Eglin Air Force Base?
Yeah, that's
Down in
where
Florida?
my special forces were when I was 23rd Commander.
Yeah, because I was S3, went through S3 Air School there
Oh,
at
yeah.
Eglin before I went to Vietnam.
That's where I trained in the O2 at Eglin. The only time in the Air Force, 8,000 flying hours I ever had a forced landing was in Eglin. That's a story for another day. Also, when I eventually became the wing commander at Dover, and that's where I met the junior senator, Joe the Biden. My daughter used to sit his
Is that right?
show in my house, and that's a story for another day.
No kidding.
I don't want to be name dropping, but oh, mackerel.
Where is he now?
Yeah, I'm somewhere.
He doesn't even know.
He'll never go away.
Okay, is the Air Force in good hands today with plenty of equipment?
That's hard to tell. I hope so. I have great faith in the younger generation. But I hope we don't politicize the military. Everything else is politics.
Hey, General, this is Lynn Redmond. I was a Air Force ROTC cadet at the University of Missouri, and I got a flight from Scott to Amarillo once on a General's converted C-47 DC-3. Did you happen to have a DC-3 as your personal plane?
No, I had a Learjet.
Oh, okay.
I had a brand new Lear 21 Learjet, and I had 140 locations to go to. I could never fly commercial and meet them all. I had to do that once a year, 140 locations, from Korea to Germany to Turkey to Spain, Panama, Alaska, Hawaii, and the Philippines. So that was a job in itself, just visiting all those units. But I had a Learjet for stateside, and then I just bummed a ride on some of my 130s or 141s.
We would go to Scott and try to get, I lived in California, we'd usually try to get a flight to Travis and then go down to Alameda and get down to Miramar, and then anyway, so that was 65 though, so that was before Learjets. Thanks for your presentation, it reminded me a lot. My cadet commander was killed in Laos on a 105, and my TAC officer at school came back from flying F-100s. And we trained at Fairchild and went to Camp Cusick in survival training. We used the 38 Smith & Wesson Masterpiece. That was our survival.
That was my armament in my Vietnam airplane.
Yeah. It was a nice pistol or revolver though. It was a nice one.
Yes, it was. When I was at SAC, we had the airweight, the 38 airweight we carried.
Oh, okay. We wanted the M1 carbine, but they gave us the 38 instead.
And some guys Max carried the AR.
It was a great presentation. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
General Mal, did you fly to all those locations stateside? Was it you with some of your staff that were going to check on them, or how did that work?
Yeah, I would take my aide and maybe my personnel guy or somebody, and once in a while I got to take my wife, and we would visit these units. And what I would try to do is give a talk to the enlisted and the officers and listen to all their gripes and give them all the latest from headquarters, and then we usually have a dinner in the O Club or the NSO Club after that. And I bounce around and try to visit all my units that way. I had small detachments. They weren't big units, you know, it was 2 or 3 helicopters and 20 or 30 people. And other ones were 5,000 man base, you know, it was all kind of units.
That's crazy. 141 different locations. Were you able to visit all those in 1 year?
Yeah, I did it once in 1 year, and another time it ran over. But what I would do is start out in the West Coast, and you would have breakfast 3 times. You'd have breakfast in Travis Air Force Base, you'd have breakfast in Hawaii, and you'd have breakfast in Guam, because you were going in that direction.
Hey, you said you transported Bob Hope's show.
Part of it. I didn't, not him, but I'll tell you a good one. On that leg from Alaska to Japan, we passed over this little island called Shimia on the Alaskan chain.
Oh, yeah.
And it was manned by about 100 guys. And they always had a joke. There was a girl behind every tree. They were the only guys there, 100 GIs. So we made a position report over that every time we flew over. Operations normal, and they would just keep track of us. And I had Miss Maryland on board, or Bob Holt's tour or somebody, and I briefed her on what to say. And I guess it was about 2 o'clock in the morning, and this poor old guy was up in a tower, and I had her really sexy voice come over there and say, "Hello, Shimmy," you know, and there was dead silence for about 30 seconds, and pretty soon every guy on the base was up in that tower. And she talked to them for about a half an hour, and she had a good time, put a headset on, put her in a jump seat, and told her what to say, make that initial report, and that was before women were flying, and those poor guys, it was a funny trip.
That's great.
Bill, is there anything that they have now, improvements that you could have used in Vietnam?
Oh yeah, I don't know, that kind of war, I don't know, the gunship, the AC-130 gunship, which was developed in Vietnam, they first started out as a C-47 with a gun sticking out the door, has now evolved into the AC-130 gunship with a tremendous amount of firepower, and that evolved from that. And if we had today's version in Vietnam, that would have been a very effective weapon. The problem was with the jungle, you just couldn't see anything.
What about laser weaponry with like laser guided missiles? And I noticed that with Iraq and Afghanistan.
You'd have to have a pretty worthwhile target for that, Frank. But the Vietnam thing in the South was just onesies and twosies. To expend that kind of weapon system on 2 or 3 guys.
That's true. That's very true. Yeah.
You know,
One shot, one kill, though.
Economy of force, yeah.
What, hey, General Mall, maybe you remember. Wasn't there someone, this might be a wives' tale or a service tale, but during Grenada, I seem to remember somebody used some kind of huge weapon to take something out, like it was using a sledgehammer to take out like one person or something like that. But that might just be a fairy tale or something like that. But I seem to remember when I was in the Marine Corps, I went in 80. I enlisted in 86, didn't go till 87. We were talking. They used some kind of heavy weapon to take like one guy out, and the reply came back was 1 shot, 1 kill. But that might have just been something they told us recruits to motivate us.
I don't know, but I know there were some special forces up north that got trapped in some buildings, and they brought in a gunship, and that might have been it. But you got 105 millimeter howitzer, 40 millimeter cannons, and 225 millimeter guns. It looks like a waterfall at night if you see it, just a steady stream, and they were very accurate. From 10,000 feet, they could keep their shots within 100 meters. So if you got the bad guys out in the open, you really would ruin their day.
Hey, Dwight, I'm not sure your daughter is familiar with this, but the artillery's got a round called the Excalibur. It's got a 40-plus mile range. It's actually a missile out of a 155 tube. And at 30 miles or 35 miles, it has a circular error of probability of 6 feet. And it comes straight down. It travels a shot ballistically, and then it turns and comes vertically down on its target. And it was developed in order to reduce collateral damage in populated areas, because it can come right down behind a building and hit within 15 feet of it and take out everything that's in that area, and still the building would be standing.
Wow.
Although they do cost $1 million a piece, they're still in existence in the arsenal.
Wow, that's amazing.
General Mall?
Yeah.
So ago, an executive order was signed to put the critical race theory training back into the Department of Defense. How do you think that's going to go over? And Gary might have an opinion on that too.
I don't know. I remember when I was in the 60s, we had race relations training. We had some of that then.